Let's talk about new research on GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy that suggests they may be able to treat addiction and possibly depression. One study involving patients with opioid use disorder found that GLP-1 medication reduced cravings by 40% over the course of 3 weeks. Another looked at the health records of more than 1 million people with alcohol use disorder or opioid use disorder. It found people taking GLP-1s had a 50% lower rate of alcohol intoxication and a 40% lower rate of opioid overdose. I sat down with Dr. Anna Lembke, professor and medical director of addiction medicine at Stanford University, to learn more. Dr. Lembke, thank you so much for joining us on The Rundown. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. As we noted, some really good signs, early signs, when we look at GLP-1s and sort of addiction. How would you characterize the promise with GLP-1s and, say, Ozempic when it comes to treating addiction?
Well, first of all, I think it's worth noting that we've reached a point in human history when we actually need a medication to help us eat less. For most of human existence, we have spent the majority of our day looking for enough food. Now we're struggling to resist food. And as a result, molecules like GLP-1s are a way to adapt to an environment of abundance. And so I think that in itself is fascinating. The promise of GLP-1s is enormous. The signal that we're seeing now in terms of helping people curb appetite, lose weight, normalize blood sugar is just really, really exciting, as well as its potential promise in treating addiction more broadly, alcohol addiction, opioid addiction, nicotine addiction. It's just really an exciting moment to have a new tool in what is a pretty limited toolbox at this point.
Help us understand the science here. How does it actually work?
So the GLP-1s mimic a molecule that we make in our bodies that's released in the gut after we eat that signals to the body, okay, you've had enough food, you can stop eating, as well as leading to the release of insulin and other hormones, which lower blood sugars and again contribute to that feeling of fullness. So they essentially augment or amplify something that our body does already.
Are there any, when we talk about the potential and its effectiveness, are they potentially more effective with certain types of addictions? Are we seeing it with alcohol? Are we seeing it with opioids?
Well, remember, they really originated to treat type 2 diabetes and related obesity. And it's really kind of a serendipitous or secondary awareness that, oh, wow, their ability to help with decreasing food intake might actually help with other addictions as well. So the strongest early signal has been with alcohol, not surprisingly, because alcohol is also a carbohydrate, right? And so that's calorie mediated. That wasn't really the hugest surprise, although, a welcome early signal. What has been surprising is some of the other potential effects of the GLP-1s, like its potential effect on an opioid addiction, a nicotine addiction, or even what we call behavioral addictions. These are like things that we do, like a gambling addiction or a sex addiction. In that people are now looking at the possibility of GLP-1s in that arena as well.
In your book, Dopamine Nation, you write that we are increasingly vulnerable to addiction. I'm curious, do we need a treatment like GLP-1s in our arsenal to fight back?
Yes, for exactly the reasons that I alluded to before, because we live in this world of abundance where almost everything has been drugified in some way, that is to say, made more potently reinforcing, more accessible, more bountiful. We're now struggling as a species to limit our consumption, to not get addicted. And as a result, we need more help in this arena just because we're really, in many ways, such slaves to our environment. We think of these diseases of addiction as being in our brains, but really they're in the space between our brains and the environment. So we're constantly looking for and inventing with increasing frequency um, tools to help with appetitive control, which essentially amount to some kind of barrier between ourselves and this problem of compulsive overconsumption.
I want to change gears a little bit. What are we learning about GLP-1s and potentially treating depression?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting and unexpected arena. A lot of folks, just anecdotally, who were put on GLP-1s for diabetes or obesity, endorse elevated mood. And initially, the thinking was, well, that's just because they're happy they're losing weight. But it really looks like there may be a separate chemical phenomenon going on here where GLP-1s might actually work as an antidepressant. There are at least 5 placebo-controlled trials now showing their effectiveness in treating depression compared to a placebo, which is to say a sugar pill, which is the gold standard of how we measure the effectiveness of various medications. So that's really, really interesting. I think there's going to be a lot more research in this arena because, of course, our armamentarium for treating depression is also quite limited. And there are lots of folks who have treatment refractory depression who don't respond to our typical treatments. So the idea that maybe there's a new kid on the block that might help folks by working through a totally novel mechanism is really exciting.
I'm hoping you can also break this down for us, get a little sciencey for us. But some depressions may be related to increased inflammation. So help us understand how exactly a GLP-1 helps with that.
Yeah, I wish I could help you understand exactly, but I don't think anybody exactly understands how this works. But that's been another interesting sort of side finding related to the GLP-1s that they seem to modulate the inflammatory response. So a huge mediator of our inflammatory or immune response actually comes from the gut lining. And the GLP-1's impact on hormone release in the gut also seems to contribute to an anti-inflammatory response. And so there's a lot of interest in that arena and the possibility that its anti-inflammatory effects, that is, it's calming down our immune system, might make it exploitable or useful to treat all different kinds of disease processes that are related to an over like an excessive inflammatory response, starting with diabetes, right? Because that is related, but also other kinds of gut inflammatory diseases and possibly mood disorders that might be related to an autoimmune or inflammatory response.
As you mentioned, a lot of this is in its early stages, but just us talking, there's a lot of excitement on the research side of where we can go. But I do want to have a conversation about access. GLP-1s are, of course, in high demand. Will people be able to properly access them when they are deemed effective?
Yeah, so this is a huge problem because right now they're really only FDA approved for the treatment of diabetes and obesity. And you need FDA approval typically to have insurance pay for it, at least in the United States. So I personally have a number of patients who I would like to prescribe GLP-1s to who I think would benefit from it for a variety of different indications, and yet who can't get it paid for by their insurance because they don't struggle with diabetes or obesity per se and can't afford it on their own. So this is a big problem. And, I think, there is an increasing awareness of trying to make these drugs more affordable and more accessible for the average person, which is really important.
One last question for you, Dr. Lemke. Of course, a lot of attention on sort of where we can go with this, with GLP-1s, but are they safe? Do we know that they're safe?
Well, they're safe to the extent that they're FDA approved. So any medication that goes through the FDA process gets tested for safety. But it's also very well established that even once a medication is FDA approved, once it's on the market, there will be adverse effects and adverse phenomenon that manifest as they become more ubiquitous or prevalent in the population. Every medication has side effects, that they're unpredictable. Some individuals will not experience any side effects. Other individuals may have very serious side effects. So, it's really important to inform patients and for patients to know about all of the side effects that do go along with the GLP-1s. And taking any medication, prescribing any medication is always going to be a cost benefit analysis. Do the benefits of this medication outweigh the risks? But there's no medication that's risk free. And so it's important to remember that.
Dr. Lembke, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.